There are few things early in Yuuki Yuuna by Yuusha de Aru that might pique your interest. A fun cast of characters and their interactions, the flower motif which gives the series its unique aesthetic, or maybe just seeing a cute girl in a wheelchair caught your attention. While all of these are true, what not as many people give credit is how the series establishes its setting and uses the mystery around it to support the narrative. It's the first entry in the franchise, while chronologically taking place the latest. The setup is that 300 years ago mankind was brought near extinction by an unknown virus. Part of humanity was saved by a god known as Shinchu-sama, a divine tree that created a protective barrier around the area of Shikoku, where our story takes place. Time since then is known as the Divine Era and seems to function similar to our modern era, with the religious worshipping of Shinchu-sama being important to people to the point of there being a shrine in all houses and classrooms. And morning greetings include a prayer to the Divine Tree. Also, the organization with the most power in this society is known as the Taisha, and it's centered around serving Shinchu-sama. This is the setup as known to the people living in this era and serves as a starting point to the story, as it's told from the point of view of our main character. As the story progresses, we establish the main story of the series, which is that our main cast are given power by Shinchu-sama to become heroes, basically magical girls, to protect it from mysterious beings known as the Vertex, that want to destroy Shinchu-sama and bring the end of the world. At this point this feels like just a setup for a magical girl story, the only real point of interest being the religious focus and imagery. The interest is that from early on it's obvious that there is more going on with the hero system and the world than is initially revealed. Why would a virus send weird monsters to try to destroy humanity? This means that we spent the first season figuring out and dealing with these things along with the main characters. The point of this is to make the viewer interested in why and how the world is like this. We get some answers during the first season, but not all of them. Things might happen without proper explanation, and while the epilogue bonus story Sonoko After answers some, many questions are left to be answered by further entries in the franchise. Washio Sumi wa Yuusha de Aru is the next entry in the franchise and is a prequel to NoWaYu, focusing on the previous generation of heroes. It was originally released as a light novel that actually started publishing before the airing of NoWaYu, and ended before the ending of the anime. It was later adapted into anime, serving as a sequel to NoWaYu. But the time of its original release is interesting, because while at first it seems very much to be intended to be read or watched after NoWaYu, the original release order implies that there is an intent to have at least some information about WaSuYu before or as you are watching NoWaYu. I believe this is mainly to show the differences between the hero systems at the start of both stories. We see the absence of fairies and mankai in the WaSuYu hero system, and the Vertex battles are missing the sealing ritual. These play an important part in NoWaYu, and we are made to wonder how and why these changes happen, since WaSuYu takes place only 2 years before. There's a bunch of other stuff like a fun cast of characters and how all these details we find out tie into the themes of the story, but I think the most important parts are the small differences that make you curious about what's going to happen, that are the necessary hook for a multi-entry franchise such as this. Where things get interesting is in Nogi Wakaba wa Yuusha de Aru, originally released as a novel about half a year after the ending of NoWaYu. Later adapted to manga and anime never. It's interesting because it takes place 300 years before NoWaYu. That is, it takes place during as the most of humanity is destroyed, and follows the first generation of heroes that emerged during this time. We get answers to many questions of how and why things are the way they are. Once again, there are differences in the hero system. Most notably, instead of having fairies protecting them like in the earlier parts, the heroes have trump cards that have them house fairies inside their bodies, granting them special power in combat. There are also smaller things like having actual physical weapons instead of summoning them, but the point is that this is another hook to make us want to know how and why these changes happen. The state of the world outside the barrier is different from previous entries, and considering how big of a plot point that was, makes it a very good point of intrigue. We get to see how the Vatex threat evolves from the very beginning. Many people lost friends and family in the initial invasion and developed a form of PTSD. The first heroes found their weapons during this time and saved many people. This leads to the heroes being respected as a symbol of hope during this time. People started worshipping Shinju-sama as it protects humanity, but also as the source of heroes' power, and the Taisha serving Shinju-sama become the most influential organization in the world. The first Vortex battles are quite different from the others in the series, starting as an infinite invasion of small stardust. Later, becoming larger beings named after constellations, as we see in the other entries. Everything we know about the Vortex in start of NoWaYu is something the first heroes figure out for future generations. We are even ultimately revealed why the Vortex are attacking and where they come from. But as we can guess through the previous entries in the franchise, the battles get increasingly difficult to the point of seeming desperate towards the end. This leads to one of my favorite points, the Taisha censoring. The Taisha control all the information about what's going on to the public, eventually managing to even mask the existence of the Vortex as a virus, as we know from NoWaYu. They make the heroes become a symbol of hope for people to keep up their everyday lives, even when the heroes and Taisha both know how desperate the situation actually is. Without going into details, the Taisha hide all the bad things happening among the heroes and ultimately find a way to achieve peace for the next 300 years until the events of NoWaYu, transforming the world to what we know it as from the previous entries in the franchise. It's even implied that Wakaba and Hinata contributed greatly to the development of the future hero system and trying to find a way to restore the world. Even if we knew the end result, there is a sense of catharsis that comes from seeing how it all comes together, and all this detail and history make NoWaYu the point where the setting really starts coming together. Kusunoki Mebuki by Yuusha de Aru is a light novel series up next, taking place somewhere between NoWaYu Season 1 and early parts of Season 2. Instead of following heroes, it follows sentinels. Foreshadowed in the epilogue of NoWaYu, they are not as strong as heroes, but in exchange can be mass-produced, giving the humanity a means of fighting. There is some cool thematic ideas and tie-ins to, as it was releasing, soon airing NoWaYu Season 2. But unfortunately I feel like it ends before its ideas being fully realized, and as such is the only entry in the franchise I feel can be skipped without losing anything of value. Yuuki Yuuna by Yuusha de Aru, Yuusha no Sho, is Season 2 of NoWaYu, and is currently the last major entry in the franchise, bringing to close the narrative that's been built for 3 years since airing of Season 1. The most notable thing here is that if you just watch the anime series, there will be parts that don't fully make sense. It's the next big entry in the franchise after NoWaYu, and is more of a sequel to it than NoWaYu. Every entry so far has been about fighting the Vatex. In NoWaYu, we find out why they are attacking and where Shinju-sama fits in this conflict. This is important to understand the nature of the enemy in the final conflict, and details like the imagery of Yuuna's curse. This idea of Yuusha no Sho being continuation of NoWaYu is further supported by the first hero's appearance in the opening, the memorial to heroes, and Wakaba's spirit literally being the bird that guided Yuuna out of the enemy territory. It's not that you can't understand Yuusha no Sho without reading NoWaYu. There are the usual character interactions, themes about protecting everyday life and stopping sacrifice, but it's all about the small details, how everything ties together. Yuusha no Sho builds on every previous entry in the franchise and serves as the narrative and emotional payoff to all of it, and I think it would do a disservice to experience it without the full intended context of the franchise. So in short, read NoWaYu. Seriously, it's really good. There are other aspects in the franchise that I love, the great character interactions, how everything ties into the themes of protecting everyday life, The flower imagery and references to Shinto mythology I don't really get but still like aesthetically, but all of those are out of scope for this video. There's still some other media, like some visual novels and the mobile game, and while mostly just fun side stories, there are some smaller added details in those as well. I haven't kept up with the mobile game for a year or so I'm going to leave it at that. The message I want to leave off with is that the Yuusha de Aru franchise is pretty cool and worth getting into. I have just scratched the surface of what I love about the franchise, so there might be more to come. And with one final announcement, I'm signing off.
Hey, Washi!